Welcome to Risky Business. Today I have another opinion piece for you. And man, we sure like to argue about stuff on social media, don't we? I see this one a lot. Is the Legend of Zelda series an RPG? And I'm guilty of this too. I love to argue on social media. It's a really bad habit. I don't know, I guess it's fun to engage with people in that way, but it can be a little frustrating too, especially when people don't listen to each other, which I think is the case more often than not, unfortunately. But let's talk about this. I have some opinions and some thoughts I'd like to share, and you can tell me in the comments what you think and what your thoughts are on this subject. So some people are going to say Zelda is an RPG because you play the role of Link, which is of course a ridiculous argument because by that logic, every game ever made is an RPG. So we gotta throw that nonsense straight out the window and look at this a little bit more objectively. At the time of recording this, there are 20 Zelda games just in the main series alone, not including remakes, spin-offs, etc. And each one is different than many of the others, so I think it's impossible to make a case for what the entire Zelda series is or isn't. We really would have to look at each game and see if it meets a reasonable expectation for what an RPG is. So that means we have to define what makes a game an RPG. And I think once we do that, I think we'll reach our answer pretty quickly. So obviously there is no one official definition of what an RPG is. There's no organization out there that is the arbiter of what is or is not a game of any given genre. And even within the video game world, what makes a game an RPG is pretty loosely defined. I think we want to understand what is or is not a role-playing game by looking at the origin of the genre, and that is tabletop games. Even the earliest video RPGs were based on Dungeons & Dragons, a game which gave life to countless imitators. Even today, intrepid adventurers will sit around a table with their large collections of dice and act out elaborate stories, while rolling their way to victory or defeat. Their characters not only have stats and abilities that define them both inside and outside of combat, but also gain additional abilities and stat points as they adventure. What all tabletop RPGs seem to have in common are a complex set of rules, individual player characters with base statistics that grow based on the player's actions, a storyline in which the players must participate, an assortment of equipment and treasures, and ever-changing challenges both related to fighting and interacting with the established game world. The limitations of computers and game consoles, especially back in the 80s and even the 70s, made the nearly unlimited freedom of tabletop games impossible to replicate digitally. As such, the genre had to be reduced to fit into what could be achieved with a computer. This means interacting with the game world outside of battles became much less important, so this element is not a necessary part of video RPGs. The earliest computer RPGs were created way back in the 70s, mainly as text-based adventures. Dungeon is probably the first ever CRPG, and it's basically an attempt by a programmer named Don Daglow to bring Dungeons & Dragons into a computer. This game featured experience points and a level-up system. The game was mostly played in text, though it did contain some visual elements like dungeon maps, as crude as they were. Ultima 3 is largely considered to be the first modern CRPG, and took place within a fantasy world established in the two previous Ultima games. This series would further imitate pen and paper games in its coming installments by adding a system in which the player's conduct outside of battles would affect their standing in the game world. Taking all of this into account, I think it's fair to say that in order to be classified as a role-playing game, a game must have, at a minimum, an experience and leveling system in which the player, character, or characters grow stronger based on their in-game actions, or the ability to interact with NPCs in the game world with some level of freedom. The only Zelda title which features anything like an experience and leveling system is Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. No game in the Zelda series allows the player to decide how Link should behave. Link is the hero of Hyrule, and his personality and behavior are determined by established in-game lore and cannot be influenced by the player's actions. As such, only Zelda 2 is an RPG. The rest of the series are all adventure games. Bottom line, any game in which the protagonist sets off on a heroic quest, in which there are no experience points or leveling system, and the player does not get to control the behavior or in-game standing of the player character, is an adventure game. Full stop. End of discussion. So I hope I made a good case here for what is and is not a role-playing game, and I think you'll see that the Legend of Zelda games are adventure games and don't have any role-playing elements. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Next time, we're going to change things around a little bit. We're going to start talking about the Ghostbusters and the way that video games have treated the Ghostbusters franchise. We're going to go all the way back to the early computer games, talk about that dubious Nintendo Ghostbusters game, the Master System version, and then we'll talk about some of the other games that came out in between, and then we're going to have a little conversation about the more recent Ghostbusters video game. And then we're going to go into another topic off of that. So I hope that you enjoy this, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on that Ghostbusters video, and until next time, game over.